Hello, my fellow broke aristocrats, and welcome back. I've been off for a couple of days. I've been very busy. Today is a fun video. Well, it's kind of a review. We're doing Budgeting 101, and the reason I decided to do Budgeting 101 is because we really haven't done any beginner videos on broke aristocrats for some time. So this video is simply Budgeting 101 for those of you who are new to budgeting, or if you simply want to refresh your knowledge of how to budget. This is just going through the basics. It shouldn't take more than 10 minutes, and I think it's going to be very helpful for those of you who are just now trying to get on a budget and pay off debt, live below your means. So the first thing I want to start by saying is that there are three components to creating a budget. There are three components to creating a budget. The first is that we want to determine what our income is. How much money do we actually have coming in? That could be salary, that could be cutting the neighbor's grass, babysitting. Whatever your salary is, that's going to be different than receiving a gift or something like that. This is consistent money that you have coming in. The second is to get a rough idea of what your bills are. That is money going out. So the first component is money coming in, how much money is consistently coming in, versus number two, how much money is consistently going out. And then the third component is our debt. So those are the three things that a broke aristocrat wants to focus on. Now there's a couple of ways that you can do your budget. You can do it longhand by getting a simple 99-cent note card. We certainly have these for writing down daily expenses. I think it's pretty helpful. You can also do an Excel spreadsheet. There are several really great tutorials about building a spreadsheet with Excel. Gazelle Intense did a really great video, and I'll link it to this one if you'd like to learn how to build a budget using Excel. I certainly did that in the beginning. So those are the three components to building a budget. So let's start with the first, your salary. Now, if you're like me, you might have salary that's coming from a couple of places. And so in your salary, in the section of your budget, you're going to be wanting to list all of those income sources. For example, if you work part-time at the flower store, you might want to have a rough idea. You want to write down a rough idea of how much is coming in, and then your second job if you have a small business, etc. Now, if you have inconsistent salary because you're self-employed, sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. Some people make a determination that their salary is somewhere in the middle. They average it out and say, well, I average about $5,000 a month. Others want to play it safe and say, well, I'm going to go on the low end. Say I work for myself and in a bad month I earn $3,000 a month, and in a high month I earn $5,000 a month. I'm going to play it safe and say that my monthly income is $3,000 a month just to make sure that I'm going to be okay. That's absolutely fine. Whatever system you use, you just want to get a rough idea what works for you about what you want to have constitute your monthly income. So for me, that means being self-employed because I have a private practice. I also work part-time for somebody. And so what I did is I chose to pick what my lowest income is in my private practice, and then I determined that as my assumed salary for the month. And then anything that goes over can go towards things like debt reduction if you're trying to reduce debt, or it can go into building your retirement, or be put towards some other an emergency fund if that's where you're needing to put the money. So so we've now got a rough idea of how much money is coming in, and we can move on to building our budget for how much money is going to be going out. Now, the first thing you really want to make sure and start your budget with is something we call the 4 walls, and that is the necessities. What do you need in order to live? Well, most of us, we need a place to live. So the first thing you're going to want to budget for, the first thing you're going to write down is your rent. That is non-negotiable. You need that to live. Now, you could certainly try and reduce your rent once you do your budget. If you feel like, well, I can see here I can't financially afford to live where I live, and then you try to find a place that's cheaper, that's certainly an option. But for now, we just want to have the first thing we write down be our rent. And after that, you want to look at other things that are necessities like utilities, food, and transportation. If your health insurance is not covered by your job, you may also want to put health insurance down as a necessity or a part of your four walls. If you've got pets and you need to feed your pets, then I think that's just fine if you call that your four walls. Now, luxury items are what comes after the four walls, and these are things like Netflix, going out to movies, what we call fun money, or luxury items, things that we really don't need. And those are going to be the first things that you start to get rid of if you're trying to pay down debt, if you're trying to come up with a budget. There's another category that we talk to people about, and that's called the emergency fund, and that's having a little bit of money that you build up. You might want to contribute to it a little bit every month, or you might want to start off really focusing on that first before you pay down the debt, and that's something called an emergency fund. That's some money that you have in your savings account in the event of an emergency. Personally, before I started to pay down my debt, I put $1,000 in an emergency fund in my savings. I started paying down my debt, but I made sure every month to put in my budget adding additional money into my emergency fund, simply because I knew I lived in an expensive city and I knew that I would need more than $1,000. Whatever system works for you, just try and be as consistent as you can be. So you've got your four walls, you've got your luxuries, you've got a pretty good idea of how much money is coming in, and now you can also look at your debt. Now, when calculating how to pay off your debt, you want to look at two things: the amount of the debt and the amount of the interest. Now, different people have paid off their debt differently, but I think the snowball method works pretty good. And that's basically where you write down every single debt that you have, and you basically pay off the minimum on everything but the debt that is the smallest. So I'll give you an example. Say, for example, on one credit card you owe $500, another you owe $2,000, and another you owe $5,000. In the snowball method, you would pay a minimum on the larger debt, and any extra money you would put towards tackling that debt of $500. Get rid of that first, and then the following month you would focus on the credit card that is higher than that, say the $2,000 a month credit card. And then you focus on putting a bare minimum on all the other debts, and then hitting hard that smallest until eventually it snowballs and you pay off all the debts. I hope I explained that in a way people can understand. Basically, you pay the bare minimum on all your debts, but the smallest one, that's the one you're going to hit the hardest until it's gone, and then you roll that extra money the following month towards the next until eventually you pay off the debts. That's the debt snowball. Again, there's two ways you can do it. One is by tackling the smallest debt first. The other is tackling the one with the highest interest. I was lucky because the one with the highest interest was the smallest, so it worked out very nice when I paid off my debt. All right, so that's basically the components of how to build a budget: your salary, your bills, and your debt, and how to create wiggle room. When you're trying to get extra money, there's two ways you can do it. One is to get that second job, if drive an Uber or whatever you need to do to pay off the debt. The other is to begin to tweak the budget that you already have. Say, for example, you have allotted yourself $200 in fund money. You might want to drop it to $100, or say you've allotted yourself $300 for groceries. You might want to see if you can still eat nutritiously. If you're a broke aristocrat, we want you to eat healthy and nutritiously, but see if you can't reduce it. We always want you to start by reducing the luxuries first before you start to attempt to reduce the four walls. The 4 walls are the last thing you start reducing if you're really desperate for paying off those bills. The number one thing, of course, is to create the budget, but if you are needing more cash, in addition to seeing if you can't negotiate for a raise or working a second job, we would say get rid of the luxuries first. It's much easier to get rid of a hobby, at least temporarily, than it is to start skipping meals. So this is why we always say when reducing or trying to cut cost, start with the luxuries first. An example would be if you have a subscription to a magazine, if you've got Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime, etc. See if you can't start one by one cutting some of those subscriptions. It really does add up. Other ways you can save money is, say for example, you have a clothing allowance, but you are able to reduce it by shopping consignment or finding more affordable ways to get clothes. There are always ways to cut cost, but again, we strongly encourage you begin by cutting cost of luxuries and non-essential items first before you move on to cutting things that are considered the 4 walls. When you do get to the 4 walls and say, you know what, I cut all the luxuries, I took the second job, I'm still drowning in debt. If you still need to start cutting things, that is when you start looking at things of how can I get the clothing costs down, how can I get the food costs down, do I need to move to a more affordable place to live, do I need to get a cheaper form of transportation. Because we don't encourage people to acquire more debt at Broke Aristocrats, we certainly, unless you absolutely had no choice, we certainly don't want you to be going out and leasing a car or something like that. At the same time, we want you to stay safe and to get from point A to point B in a safe manner. So basically, that is it. That is the simple budgeting tips from Dr. Whimsy, from me to you. Hopefully, you've been looking at examples that I've been showing you throughout this video. And if you'd like to be able to start building that first budget and you need a little bit of help, you can certainly check out the links that I have attached to this video that are pretty extensive and they're pretty great, particularly if you want to build something using a system like Excel. All right, I want to thank you for watching this video of Broke Aristocrats. Be sure and share, like, subscribe. Tell me what you're doing to take care of yourself without breaking the bank, and we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.